I can imagine the measured response of that country gentleman to a voice a century and a half beyond his own. It's not a satisfying fantasy. The Victorians of our remembrance are now mostly settled into a comfortable corner of our remembrance, but I cannot imagine your responses, at least not all. Too many shadowed residues are there in your text. Too many emotional tripwires. You left us too soon, and your restless spirit haunts us still. Is it so odd to speak across 150 years apostrophically? I think not. Certainly not if the subject is natural history. The wheels of organic evolution turn at millennial pace, too slowly for evolution to have transformed species from your time to my own. The natural habitats they compose also remain mostly unchanged. Walden woods around the pond, having been only partly cut and never plowed, looks much the same in my time as in yours. Its ambience can be expressed in similar language. Anyway, the older I become, the more it makes sense to measure history in units of lifespan. That pulls us closer together in real time. Had you lived to be 80 instead of 44, we might today have a film clip of you walking around Walden Pond, in the beach, on the beach, through straw-hatted and parasol crowds on holiday. We could listen to your recorded voice from one of Mr. Edison's early wax cylinders. Did you speak with a slight burr, as generally believed? I'm 71 now, old enough to have had tea with Darwin's last surviving granddaughter at the University of Cambridge. While an Harvard undergraduate student, I discussed my first articles on evolution with Julian Huxley, who as a little boy sat on the knee of his grandfather, Thomas Henry Huxley, Darwin's bulldog disciple and personal friend. You will know what I'm talking about. You still had 3 years to live when in 1859 The Origin of Species was published. It was the talk of Harvard and among the Salonists along the Atlantic seaboard. You purchased one of the first copies available in America and annotated it briefly. Here is one more circumstance on which I often reflect. As a child, I could, in theory, have spoken to old men who visited you in Walden Pond when they were children of my age at that time. Thus, only one living memory separates us. Here, at the cabin site, even that seems to vanish. Forgive me, I digress. I'm here for a purpose, to become more a Thoreauvian. And with that perspective, better to explain to you and others, and not least to myself, what has happened to the world we have both loved. The landscape away from Walden Pond, the start, has changed drastically. In your time, the forest was almost gone. The tallest white pines had been cut long before and hauled away to Boston to be trimmed into ship masts. Other timber was harvested for houses, railroad ties, and fuel. Most of the swamp cedars had become roof shingles. Still a wood-powered nation, America was approaching its first energy crisis as charcoal and cordwood ran short. Soon everything would change. Coal would fill the breach and catapult the industrial revolution forward at an even more furious pace. When you built your little house from the dismantled planks of James Collins' shanty in 1845, Walden Woods was a threatened oasis in a mostly treeless terrain. Today it is pretty much the same. although forest has grown up to fill the farmland around it. The trees are still scraggly, second-growth descendants of the primeval giants that clothed the lake banks until the mid-1700s. Around the cabin site, beech, hickory, red maple, scarlet and white oak push up among the half-grown white pines in a bid to reestablish the rightful hardwood domination of New England forest. Along the path from your cabin on down to the nearest inlet, now called Thoreau's Cove, these trees give way to an open stand of larger white pines whose trunks are straight and branches evenly spread and high off the ground. The undergrowth consists of a sparse scattering of saplings and huckleberry. The American chestnut, I regret to report, is gone, done in by an overzealous European fungus. Only a few sprouts still struggle up from the old stumps here and there, soon to be discovered by the fungus and killed back. Sprouting their serrated leaves, the doomed saplings are faint reminders of the mighty species that once composed a full quarter of the eastern virgin forest. But all the other trees and shrubs you knew still flourish. The red maple is more abundant than in your day. It's more than ever the jack of all trades in forest regeneration. More than ever the crimson glory of the New England autumn. I can picture you clearly, as your sister Sophia sketched you, sitting here on the slightly raised doorstep. It's a cool morning in June, by my taste the best month of the year in New England. In my imagination, I have settled beside you. We gaze idly across the spring-fed lake of considerable size that New Englanders perversely call a pond. Today, in this place, we speak a common idiom, breathe the same clean air, the unchanging whisper of the pine. We scuff the familiar leaf litter with our shoes, pause, and look briefly to watch a circling red-tailed hawk pass overhead. Our talk drifts from here to there, but never so far from natural history as to break the ghostly spell, and never so intimate as to betray the childish sources of our common pleasures. 1,000 years will pass and Walden Woods will stay the same, I think, a flickering equilibrium that works its magic on human motion in variations with each experience. Thoreau, your family name put the emphasis on the first simple syllable, as in the adjective thorough, did it not? At first, that's what your best friend, Ralph Emerson, Waldo Emerson, scribbled on a note found among his papers. Although, so, thorough, you would have liked the Biodiversity Day we held in your honor here recently. It was conceived by Peter Alden, a Concord resident and international wildlife tour guide. Easy name to remember. He's a descendant of John Alden of Pilgrim fame. On July 4th, 1998, the anniversary of the day in 1845 that you moved into the Walden cabin, Peter and I were joined by more than 100 other naturalists from around New England. We set out to list all of the wild species of organisms, plant, animals, fungi, we could find in one day with unaided vision, or hand lens, within a broad section of Concord and Lincoln around Walden Pond. We aimed for 1,000 species. The final tally, announced to a thorn-scratched, mosquito-bitten group assembled for an outdoor meal, was 1,904. Well, actually, to stretch standards a little bit, because the next day, it was 1,905, because the next day, a moose came from somewhere and strolled on into Concord Center. It soon strolled out again and evidently departed the Concord area, thus lowering the biodiversity back to the July 4th level. If you could have come back that biodiversity day, you might have joined us unnoticed. That is, if you refrained from bringing up President Polk and the Mexican question. Even the 1840s clothing would have betrayed you, given our own scruffy and eclectic field wear. You would have understood our purpose, too, from your last two books, Faith in a Seed and Wild Fruits, finally rescued from your almost indecipherable notes and published in the 1990s. It is apparent you were moving toward scientific natural history. When your life prematurely ended, it was logical for you to take that turn. The beginning of every science is description and naming of phenomena. Human beings seem to have an instinct to master their surroundings that way. We cannot think clearly about any plant or animal until we have a name for it. Hence the pleasure of bird watching.